Hello, my name is Makayla and welcome to MBTI types and book recommendations. So this is not which main character is your MBTI type, so it has nothing to do with like the personality types of the characters, but it's more so what would you likely enjoy based on the fact that you are X type and your cognitive functions are X and X. So I'm going to kind of focus on the general plotline and themes of the story that might be appealing potentially to each MBTI type. Some of these are going to be more popular books, others are more obscure, I think, but it can be the next book on your to-read list. So I will say that most of these are fiction, not all of them. A couple of them are memoirs, and I will point out when they are memoirs, but most of them are going to be just like historical fiction, realistic fiction, or fantasy. Also, I apologize. I think there's like dust that just occasionally floats because I'm like kind of sitting in the sun a little bit, so the camera's picking up every speck of dust that's going across the screen. I promise that's not bugs flying around here. So let's start off with ISFJ, and the recommendation for that is The Book Thief. It's a historical fiction which I feel like would appeal to the ISFJ's dominant introverted sensing, and then also their auxiliary extroverted feeling, because a lot of the book has to do with relationships forged, and it is set during the Holocaust in Germany. I think that a huge part of the book was kind of relationships between the narrator and the characters, and then also just between the characters themselves. So I think that this would probably be fun for the ISFJ to explore because of those dynamics between all of the characters. The ISTJ should read Drowning Ruth. This is actually the book I'm currently reading, so I don't know how it ends yet, but it has a very good thoroughness to it. And what I mean by this is like it's just a good setting, good pacing, and I think it moves at kind of the steady rate that the ISTJ would be drawn to. Like, it's not a weird format, it's just kind of the typical good novel that you're going to read and enjoy every page of it. It's also historical fiction set in 1919, and it's also a bit of a mystery surrounding someone's death. For the ISFP, I chose Omeros, which is a very abstract book, and honestly I found it difficult to understand, but I think that's why the ISFP would like it, is because you don't just understand everything. It's not completely straightforward, and you have to like really look at the meanings of words, which often have double meanings. Omeros takes the idea of Homer and kind of combines it with a different story of different characters, and it's a lot of poetic writing, and I think that because the ISFP tends to be artistic, they would enjoy this. For the ISTP, I would recommend The Name of the Wind, and even though I said earlier that it doesn't really matter based on the character's MBTI type, I think that the personality type of The Name of the Wind lead character would be very just appealing to the ISTP because they've got the same sort of wit, independence. I don't know, I think that as I was reading it, it just felt like an ISTP book, and they can be drawn into this fantasy world, and because it is a fantasy, it's kind of like a magic school Harry Potter idea, but it's still very original. It's very interesting to read. It's also a bit thick too, so the ISTP can just go off alone by themselves and read the book for a long time because it'll take a long time to get through. For the ESFJ, I chose Whistling Past the Graveyard, and this book also has a lot to do with historical fiction and Southern segregation, forging new relationships between characters, and because of this element of taking care of one another and just such an emphasis on those relationships between characters, I think that it would appeal to the extroverted feeling of the ESFJ, who kind of likes to see that in action, likes to have that focus on examining relationships between people. The ESTJ, I chose Emma, and this is a Jane Austen one, because Emma has a lot to do with etiquette of the past, and because, I mean, at least I think the ESTJ tends to be a structured person, and they have like a sort of respect for cultures and society's values, that sort of thing. I mean, I'm not saying that other MBTI types don't, I'm just saying like ESTJ probably would be very interested in how these ideals are portrayed during this time era that Jane Austen was writing in. Emma was just a fun read. Honestly, a lot of these recommendations, I don't really know how to put it into words. I just feel like an ESTJ would like the book Emma. So for the ESFP, I chose actually a graphic novel. The reason for this is because the dominant function of the ESFP is extroverted sensing, and this book was very intense, like emotionally intense and powerful. It's a memoir actually. This one's one of the memoirs, and it's about a girl growing up in Iran, and I found it to be very emotionally powerful because it was a graphic novel, so you could see the illustrations of their faces, their expressions, and it made it much more real than seeing it in just writing. So for this reason, I think that the ESFP would enjoy it. But yes, it is a graphic novel, and I actually really like that it was in this format, and I don't think it would have been nearly as good if it wasn't. ESTP, same thing. The ESTP has extroverted sensing as their dominant function. So for this reasoning, I chose Hamlet because not only is it an incredibly exciting and fun read and full of mystery and questions of whether Hamlet is going mad or not, but then you can also afterwards go watch the play on YouTube, and I think that that would really fulfill that sense of extroverted sensing so that ESTP can watch it in action after they've read the play. I thought it was really fun to read, especially because my class read it out loud and we were all characters when we read it. it, so we just read in a circle and it made it much more alive. INFJ, just a trigger warning that this book will deal with sexual assault. It was probably the most powerful book I have ever read in my entire life. It's a memoir about a girl who's been sexually assaulted and how it's impacted her, and how basically the trial of the sexual assault went. And honestly, I think that everyone should read this, but I think that the INFJ in particular, because they tend to be so internal about this kind of thinking about human rights and ideals, values, that sort of thing, I think it would be especially powerful for them to read. For the INTJ, I'm going to recommend A Song of Ice and Fire, which is the entire book series of A Game of Thrones, and my only reasoning for this is it's my favorite book, my favorite book series. I'm an INTJ, so if I liked it, maybe other INTJs would too. The INFP should read Jane Eyre, and this is because it's a very glamorous sort of read, and like, I mean, the words are all poetic, and I think that it would be very attractive to the INFP to read, and especially just because of the settings themselves as well, the outfits, what the people say, it's all just very perfect for the dominant introverted feeling of the INFP. And especially because I think that Jane's decisions and internal thinking will resonate with the INFP, who does hold values very close to their hearts, so they'll also be able to think through with Jane, what should she be doing in this situation, and I think that it'll be kind of exciting for them to read her decisions in this romance book. Okay, so for the INTP, I have the perfect book, and it's called The Decameron. It's very old, and like very old, and it's basically a ton of short stories. What's so interesting about them is not only is it very interesting because you get a good glimpse at life during the Black Death, but there's this really fascinating wit to it. Like, it's very complex, clever wit that you kind of have to reread because you think you've missed it. And I think that INTP would really enjoy the humor in these stories because it's not just surface level humor. Like, it takes intense reading and understanding to kind of get, and I think that because the INTP has dominant introverted thinking and they kind of like examining these logical sorts of problems and searching for the meaning within something, this humor would be very attractive to them, as well as just the history alone that's within these books. For ENFJ, Once We Were Brothers, and this is another Holocaust story. I think I have several Holocaust stories on this book list. That wasn't intentional, it just happened that way. I don't want to give anything away, but it's essentially about this man who has accused another man of being a Nazi during World War II, and they kind of explore that and try to figure out if the man is telling the truth or not. But it also explores a lot of family relationships and love, which is why I think it would be perfect for the ENFJ. For the ENTJ, Flowers for Algernon, and I think this is definitely a more popular book, but because it delves into like personal progress and then kind of dealing with regression, I think that would be interesting for the ENTJ because they usually have a track set up for themselves with their dominant extroverted thinking. So being able to kind of witness this character go through this internal crisis, I think would be very interesting for them to explore. For the ENFP, I picked Sarah's Key, and this is because it's an emotional read, and I think that it would really appeal to the ENFP, who is a very empathetic person usually. This is another Holocaust book. It's definitely a very sad read, but you also get to read about like a modern romance because it flips back and forth between present day and the Holocaust. So I think the ENFP would enjoy this one. And then finally for the ENTP, The Secret History, and this is because it's clever characters, a group of friends. They're all extremely clever and witty. It's set in college. It's very suspenseful, and you just kind of like have to keep turning the pages because you have no idea what's going to be happening. And also you have no idea what the intentions of the characters are, and I think that for that reason the ENTP would be very invested in trying to figure out who's lying, who's telling the truth, who has good intentions, who does not, that sort of thing. So hopefully this video is actually just a good book to read list. Maybe even read books of the other types because I believe all these are amazing books. And I love them all, even if I didn't rate them all 5 stars on my Goodreads, I still love them all. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a happy day of reading and a wonderful rest of your week.